Lovely. Well, thank you, MK. And thank you for everybody else who has put this together. And greetings, everyone. I'm Ollie Cashin, a member of the board of JRS USA here in Washington, D.C. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this special occasion, a discussion on the occasion of International Women's Day. Our subject today is the importance of mental health and psychosocial elements to helping refugees all over the world. 95% of JRS programs contain some component of work in this field, and we embrace it as one of the defining characteristics of our mission. Today, we welcome JRS practitioners reporting on our work in Central African Republic and Cameroon, Uganda, Kenya, Middle East and North Africa, Thailand, and Romania. To get us started, let me introduce you to Katie Mullins-Ali, our Senior Psychosocial Support Specialist. Katie coordinates with the international, regional, and country offices to provide support for a growing range of psychosocial activities. These activities help individuals and communities affected by displacement achieve better mental health and social connections as a way of promoting their well-being and resilience. Prior to joining JRS, Katie managed mental health, psychosocial support, and child protection projects around the world, including in Liberia, Uganda, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, and most recently in the United States in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. She has her master's in social work from Tel Aviv University with a concentration in trauma and crisis and a bachelor's in communications. Katie, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Molly. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm so happy to be here today and talk about some of our mental health and psychosocial support programming. Before I hand it off to my colleagues who will tell you more about the work that we do across the world, I'll just provide a brief background on what we mean when we talk about mental health and psychosocial support. In 2007, the Interagency Standing Committee's Global Reference Group on Mental Health and Psychosocial Support published guidelines on best practices that include the intervention pyramid. This pyramid shows the range of mental health and psychosocial services forcibly displaced individuals and communities will need, and describes the type of services that JRS provides. The first layer shows that everyone needs access to basic services and security in order to survive. Approximately 30 to 50% of people will experience a moderate to severe level of distress and will need the support of their family and community. JRS helps to prepare communities and families that have broken down during displacement so that people can thrive. About 15 to 20% of people will need more focused supports from trained JRS staff members to cope with mild to moderate mental health conditions that they are experiencing. And lastly, about 3 to 4% of people will need specialized interventions from a mental health professional in order to treat or manage a mental health condition. Forcibly displaced people experience a range of mental health and psychosocial needs, including loss of loved ones, livelihoods, life-threatening events, and overwhelming daily stressors when they try to adjust to their new lives. Because no two people have the same experience or will feel the same way, JRS provides these multi-layered holistic mental health and psychosocial supports that are tailored to the communities we serve and the individuals that we accompany. These supports often target the most vulnerable, including women and girls, and are provided through a range of innovative approaches like integrating supports into food, health, sanitation, and education. We also run activities that are more similar to what comes to mind when we think of traditional mental health interventions like support groups. Almost all of our programs include some considerations of mental health and psychosocial support. Molly mentioned the number earlier on that 95% of programming in JRS has an element of mental health or psychosocial support integrated into it. But now I'm very excited to hand it over to my colleagues, the first being Tamara Hart. Tamara is JRS's country director from Cameroon and Central African Republic. She brings with her 13 years of humanitarian and development experience in a range of contexts, including Canada, the Caribbean, and West Africa. Prior to her role as country director, she worked with JRS Nigeria as director of program operations and head of programs since April 2019. Tamara, over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon and good evening to everyone. And also thank you for the invitation to participate in what I think is a very important conversation on a very important day. So I would just like to share some of the experience that we have in Cameroon and CAR in integrating MHPSS in our programs in very practical ways. And then I also wanted to maybe discuss some overarching topics that I think we need to at least dig a little bit deeper into in the future. So in our projects in Cameroon and CAR, we are very intentional in integrating MHPSS into our programs, which tend to focus on livelihoods because that's the greatest need in the context that we're working in. Now, in Cameroon, we are working with a variety of populations. We work with internally displaced persons that are affected by the Anglophone crisis. And we also work with refugees that are from Nigeria, currently on mission in the extreme north of Cameroon, where we're working with UNHCR, and our population is mainly refugees from Nigeria. And in the east, we work with refugees from Central African Republic. And in CAR, we're also working with displaced persons. In our livelihoods program, we do find it important and we integrate mental health and psychosocial services. And we do this through support groups, also through one-on-one counseling and different leisure activities. For example, we had a camp for the children of the IDPs we work with in Yaoundé and Douala, where we were able to expose them to leisure activities, but also MHPSS integrated activities as well. And also, we have a project in the East where it's implemented with BPRM, where we also integrate and follow our livelihood participants almost on a weekly basis to see how they're doing, not only in terms of their business, how their business is going, but also in terms of their mental health and psychosocial support needs. I've also had experience in another context that I'll touch on in Nigeria, where we integrated MHPSS into our livelihood programming. It wasn't as intentional as we are in Cameroon, but it ended up working really well. And to me, it was a great example of how we can integrate some of these components without necessarily having a very huge budget. So this was the creativity of our specialist in that project, Simeon, where he decided to start a mental health support group with community members. This was something that they identified as a need. And even though it wasn't a livelihood project, their main need was around livelihood. So they started their own VSLA. So I think this is also a good example of what I wanted to touch on is in terms of root causes. So this is one of the overarching issues that I wanted to highlight because I think, of course, it's always important to integrate MHPSS, but also if we're not looking at the root causes, I often ask myself when I'm, developing programs, how sustainable will this be? So I always like that example of, we started off, as a mental health and psychosocial support group, but the main stressors that the population was facing was related to livelihoods. And so when we started to work with them to really, on a simple, pragmatic way to look at how they can improve their livelihoods, it obviously had a ripple effect in terms of their mental health. So that was one key issue that I think that like I often struggle with. And if I'm struggling with it, I know all of my colleagues are struggling with that. How we can address and integrate MHPSS in a sustainable way through doing more advocacy around the root causes of the stressors that are leading us to really need to look very closely at MHPSS. The other overarching issue that I wanted to take this opportunity to raise was around how we approach our programs in terms of balancing the requirements and needs of donors with those of our participants. So I often find, and I'm sure, for all of us in this field, that there's really a focus on the numbers. How many people are we going to reach? What is the calculation? What is the cost per beneficiary? Then oftentimes we get to a point, and I'm having those conversations more with donors. Well, how come we're not obtaining the results? Now we're looking more at outputs and outcomes, and we're being more intentional in measuring. And donors are saying, well, we've been doing these projects for 5 to 8 years. We're not seeing any change. So I think that we need to go deeper. And when I say deeper, the type of work that JRS is known for, the accompaniment, the MHPSS, that takes a lot of time. And it's not going to, happen with 5,000 people in 1 year. But I do think that once we're able to go deeper, even with a smaller number, that in 5 or 8 years, we won't necessarily be asking, well, how come we're not seeing the results? And so I think that's really an important point that I wanted to take the opportunity to discuss here, since we have a varied population, so that we can have those conversations with donors in terms of, if we're looking for lasting results, how can we go deeper and not necessarily wider in terms of numbers? So those were the two issues that I wanted to take this opportunity to raise, that even though we are strong, and I have seen it, I thought of the statistics around 95% was really interesting and reflective, because now, even as other countries, when I was working in Nigeria, before I left, we were also looking at how we can integrate the mental health and psychosocial component in our livelihoods programming in a more intentional way. And I had a meeting today with UNHCR, and they're also discussing that more. Okay, how can we integrate MHPSS more in our livelihood programs, especially now where there's some relative stability and we want to encourage people to go back home, but they're scared. So now we're seeing that even if initially MHPSS wasn't a consideration, now in terms of repatriation, they're seeing that coming up as an issue. So I do think it's important. I do think we're doing it well, but I do think that those are two issues that we need to look at more. How can we advocate with our donors so that we're able to take the time that is required to support our program participants in a way that will allow us to collectively achieve lasting results? And also, how can we look more at the root causes and advocate to address the root causes of some of the challenges our participants are facing with regards to MHPSS? Thank you.
Thank you so much for those reflections, Tamara, and sharing about some of the activities. I think one of the two things you highlighted, two really important topics, and one is the root causes and how instrumental it is for MHPSS services to be integrated into other areas like food, health, sanitation, education, livelihoods, so that we are addressing all the myriad of difficulties that forcibly displaced individuals experience. And also understanding that an investment in mental health can take time, and results are not usually seen overnight because of the amount of effort and intensity a lot of those activities require. So thank you for raising those. Next, we'll hear from Heavens Lamaro. Heavens works as an MHPSS counselor in our JRS Kampala office in Uganda. She has a background in guidance counseling and also recently attended a Fordham University course on mental health and complex emergencies. Heavens, over to you.
Thank you, Katie. Good evening and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, opportunity to share about the activity MHPSS Kampala in Uganda. I was starting appreciating JRS with amazing on my daily activities with the MHPSS colleagues in Kampala, that the mission of JRS comes to life every single day. And for me, it's very encouraging to keep on with my work, because I'm working with an organization whose mission is seen in our everyday work. And I'll start with the activities that support parents givers. JRS has been able to receive Kampala beneficiaries from different countries. Specifically, Kampala receives beneficiaries from Congo, Burundi, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Sudan, and South Sudan. So these countries are diverse and they have different cultures and religions. And one thing that is amazing with JRS is that its doors are open to all these kinds of people. So on a daily, when we meet different beneficiaries from the different programs within JRS, that is the livelihood program, the education program, most of the beneficiaries seek for psychosocial support. And when they seek for psychosocial support, we are able to identify their need for accompaniment. Usually we find that different people are more single mothers that have a back GBV. Others are single mothers that have just experienced loss of their children, or loss of their sons, or loss of other family members. So most times they are lonely and by themselves. When JRS, sometimes the need of medical support or food support, they just feel the need, for example, a family or a friend, someone to listen. And the fact that the MHPSS department is to provide them this accompaniment, emotional, to be able to part of them, always very amazing. And you find that children, especially when they receive someone who is not, for example, in the family, but from JRS, they are very excited to know that about them, about even the different cultures that they, because I've noticed you visit, for example, a family from Somalia, where they will receive you is different from a family from Congo. And they always get very interested that you could them in the way that they understand, and they feel togetherness, they share as part of the family. And I remember a specific who had a very difficult pregnancy. When she finally gave birth, she called me and told me, "Oh, counselor, I have managed to give birth successfully, and I would like you to come and see my baby." So I came and I visited her, and she told me she called her baby home because she felt like throughout the difficulty that experienced, JRS was able to give her hope. So it was reaching and very special. So talk a little about the integration of MHPSS, food, health, and education. Actually, the way that the project integrates PSS with this is still through the identification of the basic needs of the different beneficiaries. We meet most of these urban refugees at a point when they're experiencing severe stresses and triggers because of the economy of the country, especially in the recent years, because of the way the economy has changed. You find that most of them, in addition to requesting for counseling, for example, in the individual groups or the group counseling, they are in need of basic needs support. So JRS makes the provision to provide for them food support. Usually what we do is we make assessments, and from the assessment make a report, then money given to the beneficiaries. They are able to come receive the money and then go and buy specific food items that they can use for the entire household for a specific period of time. Always great because it helps in the most critical times when they need provision that daily, because we try not to create dependence, but it's given to push them at a moment when they are very vulnerable. Because much as in urban settlements, the beneficiaries have an ability to integrate and find jobs or create their own jobs to the lively skills that they in JRS, you find that it's still hard because the competition is even high. Most of the community members, the host community, are skeptical to employ them. So when they have these skills from livelihood, for example, they are always very excited when the results are good. In this picture specifically, I remember this was a beneficiary that had undergone a livelihood training skill, and his wife had undergone counseling. So I remember when he had completed his time at JRS with the livelihood student, he told me and asked possible for JRS to come see the outcome of the land. So I came home and I was very excited, and I encouraged him and told him, if you can write a testimony to the Department of Livelihood and express to them the encouragement to also go to the beneficiaries, they can know that truth, the work that is being done here, worthwhile. MHPSS is interesting me because every day, right from the gate of JRS, enter that the gate are able to receive you. It shows an element of MHPSS because when they receive, for example, a distressed beneficiary and then they make a call to the PSS department, even if this person had not ideally come to MHPSS, but maybe to the education, still you that the department of MHPSS is the first to be contacted. And the fact that we are able to support our own colleagues or to provide accompaniment to our own needs, and then at the end of close to the beneficiaries is all very, very encouraging. So the last bit I'll talk about is the individual counseling. So for the individual counseling, because most of the beneficiaries that are fleeing from these countries, like a lot of situations that can trauma, that can cause them distress. So what I noticed in my work is that a number of them end up developing anxiety disorders and PTSD. Sometimes out of the constant triggers again from the environment that they're in the host community because of the hardship. So that's why I feel like mission still of JRS is very strong here, because to one beneficiary, you might come home visit and still in the element of, for example, food, provide them with medical support. Then at the end of it, give them the ability to or to improve emotion. end of the day, it becomes a holistic approach that I find interesting and I very useful to the different areas that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heavens. I appreciate your reflection and sharing about our work in Kampala. I think the audio cut out a little bit, but I think for the most part, we were able to hear and understand the supports that you're providing. So it was really nice to hear that MHPSS is almost the first encounter when people walk through the gates of the JRS office. I appreciate the reflection also, similar to what Tamara was sharing on the integrated approach and addressing people's basic needs and security, making sure that they're able to access food when they need it as part of a mental health and psychosocial program. And of course, the story you shared about the baby and the instilling of hope in individuals that we serve is so touching. So thank you for taking the time to share about our work in JRS Kampala. Next, I'm going to pass it over to Jane Corazon Okinyo. Jane is the MHPSS and Protection Coordinator for JRS Nairobi under the Urban Refugee Program. She has a bachelor's degree in counseling psychology from Kenyatta University in Nairobi and a master's degree in clinical psychology from United States International University in Africa. She has immense experience in working with refugees, and Jane, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Katie. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. It's good night here. So just to get into the work we do here in JRS Nairobi, MHPSS is cross-cutting in all the departments that we have, that is in education and livelihood support. And we take a community-based approach in that we endeavor to train the communities so that they will be involved in their own efforts to improve their health. We don't view ourselves as the ones who have the solutions, but we believe that when the communities are trained, they'll be able to offer the assistance that is needed. We intervene in refugee communities from Somalia, from Burundi, from Democratic Republic of Congo, from Rwanda, Yemen, Eritrea, and Ethiopia. So today we will explore the role of mental health and psychosocial support activities that strengthen community and social support, specifically in the context of the communities we have mentioned and women. I will highlight 2 examples: social protection of urban refugees and MHPSS activities that can support women's mental health and psychosocial well-being. Mental health is a critical aspect of community and individual well-being. It is affected by various factors, including social and economic conditions. For refugees living in urban areas, their mental health and psychosocial well-being are often compromised due to their precarious living conditions, limited access to basic services, and social isolation. Therefore, providing social protection to urban refugees is crucial in supporting their mental health and psychosocial well-being. Social protection measures can include access to basic needs such as health care, where we provide medicine for the clients and also offer transport for them to go to hospital. We refer them to education of the livelihoods department as an exit point for them to be more self-reliant. And we also offer basic needs like food, where we provide food vouchers, and we help some of them to pay for their rent for the very, very vulnerable ones. Moving on to the context of women's mental health, MHPSS activities that strengthen community and social support are crucial. Women are particularly vulnerable to mental health issues due to gender-based discrimination, violence, and unequal access to resources and opportunity. They must carry immense burden of family care as the husbands either abandon their responsibilities and don't engage in economic activities. Providing MHPSS activities that strengthen community and social support can significantly improve women's mental health and psychosocial well-being. These activities include peer support groups, community-based mental health services, capacity building for community health workers, and referral to economic empowerment programs. Peer support groups provide a safe space for women to share their experiences and emotions. They receive emotional support and learn coping skills from each other. Community-based mental health services such as counseling and psychotherapy can help women address mental health issues and improve their well-being. Capacity building for mental health champions who are able to support people who present with stress symptoms and mild depressive symptoms. Economic empowerment programs such as skills training and microfinance can improve women's economic status and reduce their vulnerability to mental health issues. In conclusion, MHPSS activities that strengthen community and social support are critical to improving mental health and psychosocial well-being of vulnerable communities such as refugees and women. By providing social protection measures, we can support their mental health and psychosocial well-being, promote social cohesion and integration, and contribute to peace and stability. Similarly, providing peer support groups, community-based mental health services, capacity building for community health workers, and economic empowerment programs can significantly improve women's health and promote gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane Corazon, for the overview of the programming in Nairobi. And I think something that you said that really resonated with me was not coming up. We don't come up with solutions for people, but we help them find the solutions for themselves. And another thing that you said that I think is really important in our work is learning coping skills from each other. So oftentimes it's not top down. It's not that we know the way, but it's helping people to develop that community support around them. So thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your reflections on the Nairobi program.
Thank you, Katie.
Our next speaker is Leen Farhat. Leen is from Beirut, Lebanon, and she has a BA in psychology from the American University of Beirut and a Master's of Science in Clinical Psychology and Health Services from Goldsmiths College, University of London. She was also among the first cohort and few people selected to complete a diploma in development and organization of mental health services from the University of St. Joseph, and works with JRS at the region as the regional MHPSS officer for our Middle East North Africa region. Over to you, Leen.
Thank you, Katie, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon for those who's noon, and good evening for those that are evening. I'm happy to be on this panel. Actually, the picture that is being presented right now was not taken long ago. It was during one of my missions to Syria as a response to the earthquake. As you know, our colleagues were not affected physically, but they were affected emotionally. And something that I would like to praise JRS for is that because of this earthquake, or maybe through this earthquake, we had realized that JRS doesn't just advocate for beneficiaries, they advocate for their staff. So in MHPSS, I think we focus too much on our beneficiaries that we forget ourselves. And it was really nice to see that in Syria, they had not forgotten that. And to see how many people were willing from Lebanon, from Jordan, from Iraq to go directly to Syria and help our colleagues in Aleppo who were not able to sustain anymore. Building on Tamara's point about sustainability, actually something that I find amusing is that the interagency principles, MHPSS principles, are 6 principles, whereas in UNHCR, they're 8, because they have added the ability to be a part of it, which we would think is already integrated within the 6 principles that are already there. But sustainability is a huge issue, especially in countries that are constantly in emergency response. And something that we are looking at in MENA countries, that at least most of them, namely Lebanon and Syria, people are still on survival mode. So we cannot assess their resilience. We cannot say that they are resilient because it's compounding crises. It's just a disaster after the other, and they're still living the situation. The situation is not done. So we really are in survival mode in several countries. But something that I would like to highlight is I actually saw the statistic that was right before my speech of saying 73% of MHPSS activities strengthen community, so a community support. Or actually, I would like to say is in our countries, our MHPSS utilize it, because what's really, really nice to see in different MENA countries is that whenever a disaster happens, whatever emergency response is, the community starts responding before any other humanitarian setting, before any other humanitarian entity. And we like to empower that and highlight that and build on their strengths and capacities throughout the things that they have done. So our needs assessments or rapid needs assessments are not done in your normal professional way or like scientific way or structured way of doing it. It's actually based on how we see the people have come up with their own initiatives, because people have shown to be how caring they are, how much they would to protect their citizens and try their best to serve their identity, which is rightfully so. But a huge part of people we work with are refugees and internally displaced people, and now even more so after the earthquake that happened. Something that I would also like to highlight is that the refugees that we work with, or the internally displaced people, although it has forced women, both women and children, to be working due to the economic crisis, we have taken it as an opportunity, not saying that it was the ideal way, but we do work with empowering them and minimizing the risks that could happen as a result of them working. So child labor is very common, unfortunately, in the countries that we work in, because it's very hard for a family to sustain if it's only the father, which usually it's they say the father is the one working. Now the mother and the child or the children, they have to work, and they're being exposed to worst forms of child labor or child labor itself, especially if they are girls. They are being more exposed to sexual harassment due to their nature of work, and also building on GBV. Some boys are also being exposed to sexual harassment or even rape, but are not speaking forward because they're really ashamed. So the GBV we are highlighting, we are trying to really make men and boys more comfortable to come to our centers. And something that resonates a lot with me is that in every country I go to, I see that, as someone said on the panel, JRS really accompanies. They don't just advocate, they don't just serve, they accompany, like throughout, I don't know how long, but it was really very heartwarming to see. It's very heartfelt. Something to also add is that in the MENA region, we are integrating MHPSS in education, health, and livelihoods. And usually it's always a weird concept to non-MHPSS specialists of how that can look like in these projects. One of the terms that in the regional office for MENA, we have some forbidden words, which is, and one of them is cross-cutting. So MHPSS, I am no one's allowed to say cross-cutting. It's either integrating or mainstreaming. And for donors, I do not want to see improved well-being as an indicator by itself. We have a specific framework to go by it and to clearly define well-being, because otherwise our work on the ground is not being shown. And it's really like taking up, really the social workers or all of the field staff and everyone putting in the effort into creating results and making change. It is not being properly translated in our proposals and our findings due to very small logistics that I feel like we need to give awareness sessions just to the donors. So in livelihoods, actually, we are getting the opportunity to invest more and more in MHPSS, starting with providing them with the life skills needed to go on and have like job opportunities. So life skills isn't just working on their personal or interpersonal life skills, it's more of also working on their employability. So like negotiation skills, communication skills. So usually when someone thinks of life skills, they go directly to things like anger management or like decision making, problem solving. But we are trying to integrate life skills within the program to help them get better opportunities and job level. And in case, because livelihoods has different phases of selection and there's eventually a panel that decides. So the people who do not get this opportunity to continue with their business, at least they would have learned the skills and no one goes out empty-handed. Always we are trying to make the best out of things and integrating peace building and social cohesion as a very important component within MHPSS and as standalone. It has been something proven to be effective and beneficial, especially in the MENA countries. I do not have particularly specific thing to tell you around that area because it's something we're trying to build from scratch and strengthen. But what I can tell you is that we are following an MHPSS preparedness strategy all the way, and a lot of trainings are being provided. And yeah, that's it from my end.
Thank you so much, Leen. I appreciate also sharing about I think Tamara hit on this in terms of the root causes, but sharing some of the practicalities that we do experience and our role of trying to mitigate risk when we can't always totally prevent it because of the current circumstances. And this is the environment that we work in. And also, I think a common theme that's coming up is the improvement in well-being, or what we are trying to measure, can be very difficult at times, but we do actually have tools to measure the effectiveness of our programming. And we're trying to make it a shared language so that everyone can understand what we mean when we're providing MHPSS services and what that actually looks like in terms of impact and outcome. And the last thing that I want to highlight is also just touching on the well-being of staff too. So what you mentioned, and the majority of staff working in all of our contexts, a lot of our staff have been affected themselves in your situation, speaking of Aleppo. So bringing some of these principles and considerations of MHPSS programming to support our staff is also a huge part of JRS and our work. We were hoping to have Supawadee Tongrit.
Sorry, can I add one more point about individual counseling that I had forgotten to mention? Just something to highlight is due to confidentiality, I will not name the country, but I would say in one of our countries of intervention, during an individual counseling session, a beneficiary had disclosed that they will be committing suicide. There were two ways to go about it. So the social worker wasn't sure if this was like a cry for help, or if the person was at imminent risk of going through with their plan. So this was like one day before the JRS offices were going to close for a week and a half. It was right before Christmas. And it really fills my heart with joy to see the team that stayed up all night, all day, trying to ensure this beneficiary's safety. and we are glad to report that she has been in better mental.
I think unfortunately we lost Leen at that point, but to the story is that the client is doing, oh, you're back now, in better mental health. Yeah, and I think the emphasis too here is that MHPSS can actually also be and is actually a life-saving intervention. For individuals experiencing what Leen was describing in our one-on-one counseling sessions. And then also that's the importance of integrating it into these other activities, mainstreaming MHPSS, because it is a life-saving intervention when we're working with forcibly displaced. So thank you, Leen, for that. And so we were going to have our colleague Supawadee Tongrit from Thailand share, but I think she's been having technical difficulties and wasn't able to join the call today. So we have some pictures that will go across the screen while I introduce our last speaker. I'm very happy to pass it over to Joan Rosenhauer, the Executive Director of JRS USA, who probably doesn't need any further introduction at this point. But Joan is going to be sharing about JRS's response to the Ukrainian refugee crisis in Poland. Over to you, Joan.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you everybody for being here. It's great to see the names and faces of so many friends of JRS USA. So I had the opportunity to visit Poland 2 weeks ago as we were approaching the 1-year anniversary of the most recent invasion by Russia of Ukraine. And just a reminder, there have been 6 million people forcibly displaced in Ukraine. Those are internally displaced people, and 8 million who have fled the country. That's a little fluid because people do go back and then they come back out as the fighting ebbs and flows. And part of that is because just remember that men between the ages of 18 and 60 cannot leave, except with some rare exceptions. And so 90% of the refugees and the displaced people in the war in Ukraine are women and children. Now you are seeing a picture with some men in it. And the reason for that is that this is one of our English language classes in one of our programs in Poland. And we do always try to incorporate the host community so that there is a good relationship between the refugees and the host community. And there's no sense that refugees are getting really special treatment. JRS is responding in 23 countries, with the particular response in the countries that immediately surround Ukraine, but throughout the rest of Europe. In the last year, we've helped 56,000 people and performed 82,000 activities to support them, including individual and group MHPSS activities. But I think the best way to understand this work is really through the people who are involved, some of the people I was able to meet. So this is Natalia. She is a refugee from Ukraine, but as others have said, we often hire refugees to work with us. And so she is now leading our programming in Nowy Sącz, which I'm sure I mingled in terms of the pronunciation. But just a shout out to our staff in Poland, because JRS Poland did not exist before the war. The Jesuits in Poland decided they had to set up JRS. And in this year, they have set up 6 programs in 6 different cities in Poland. So it's quite remarkable. Natalia is a remarkably resilient and impressive young woman who is rebuilding her life in Poland as a part of JRS's staff. But one of the things that was clear when I met Natalia, and actually it's been my experience with other refugees from Ukraine that I've met in recent months, is that their pain is really raw. It is just below the surface, and their tears flow so readily if they just begin to talk about what has happened, because their hearts are really broken as they watched the lives that they knew and their country being destroyed. And so one of the things for Natalia that brings her to tears, and the way she expressed it, was, I had hopes to live in a country with high standards, a developed country with many good things. Now I know it won't be in my lifetime. We'll have so much to rebuild. It may not even be in my children's lifetimes. Now that does break her heart. but it also makes her more determined than ever to be a part of the JRS team. And I want to lift up the fact that she is benefiting herself from our MHPSS programs. Others have talked about the importance of providing support for staff, but especially when we hire refugees, it's critical that MHPSS be available. And she's determined to provide it for others from Ukraine. She basically said it's one of the most important programs that they offer in Poland for Ukrainian refugees. So this is Yulia, and Yulia actually comes from Donetsk and has been experiencing war because she experienced the war in Crimea starting in 2014. So she's been suffering through violence and displacement since 2014 when she was in her early 20s. When this invasion occurred, she came to Poland with her boyfriend, who soon left her to fend for herself. But this is another story of a remarkable young woman who, with JRS's help, has shown incredible resilience. She's found actually several jobs that have allowed her to get her own apartment, and she really is rebuilding her life. But my colleagues introduced me to her because when she first came to JRS asking for help with employment and lodging, so again, this connection that we make with all of our programming, our staff talked to her about our MHPSS services, and she was skeptical. You know, she wanted those practical things. She needed an apartment. She needed a job. But she agreed to meet with a social worker, and she said that it was transforming. She said it was so important for her to have a chance to tell her story and get help working through her emotions. She described psychological support as treatment for her soul. And now she's convinced that it needs to be available for everyone, all of the refugees from Ukraine, especially young women. So I asked her, what would she say to people in the US? Like if she had a chance to talk to a group like this, what would she say to you? And here's what she answered. What I would tell people in the US is that I want to thank you for JRS. It's a safe place. They help me, they support me as a whole person, and they wish me every success. I want people in the US to understand that without their help, it would be unbearable. They don't know how much they help. So these experiences, these people that I've met, and everything we've heard today from our colleagues just confirm my conviction that MHPSS programs are essential for any work that we do with displaced people, including with women and children. And so on that note, I will turn it back over to Katie to open our conversation up.
Thank you so much, Joan, and thank you for sharing. I think it's really important to hear the reflections of people themselves and understand from their eyes and their experiences how they view the support that JRS has provided, particularly the MHPSS support. With that being said, yes, I would like to open up to questions. I know we don't have that much time. We shared a lot of information with you and a lot of different perspectives from different activities. So please do feel free to drop messages in the chat. I can moderate, and we did have one question that has already come in. So it's not directed to a specific person. If you do have a question directed at a specific person, please say so. But this one says, how does JRS refer people to medical doctors if medicine is needed, and who pays for this care? So I would like to open this up to any of our panelists who are referring clients out for medical support. Presumably, maybe we're also talking about like psychiatric support, maybe if there's a mental health condition, or if this question resonates with someone, we can open the floor to you.
Something.
Yes, Heavens, please.
Especially with other project, JRS works in with one of the organizations. It's called humanitarian. So they're psychiatrists, and then also JRS works with mental health national government hospital. It's a specific that needs specific support in regards to, for example, psychiatrists, because JRS Kampala does not have psychiatrists. We make a referral through the referral way, and then the person is able to receive support. For prescribed drugs, we manage support. Beneficiaries, government hospitals, together have already set up who provides drugs, and we work hand in hand with a specific health facility that we made a memorandum of understanding with. They are in position to receive the referral from us with a stamp and a signature that says that this has been assessed. Kindly support this medication. Thank you.
So Heavens, I'm going to kind of summarize what you were saying too for those of us who couldn't hear you on the call. It was breaking up a little bit, but Heavens was saying that they have established referral pathways to another international organization, nonprofit that can provide the supports, and then also to the Kampala hospital, so where they can receive the types of medical supports that they need or medication support. And it's, I think, Heavens, I understand that you said there's also a memorandum of understanding between those organizations that supports with the payment of medications that might be necessary. And I can just speak more in general. This is a consideration that we build into our programming. In some situations, JRS covers medical fees, and other situations we refer out to other INGOs who operate similarly and have the capacity, because they have the staff of specialized service providers, including doctors, to provide and respond to the needs that come up. Okay, so we have a couple of other questions that came in. Sorry, just reading through really quickly. Yeah, so this question is, again, open-ended to anyone who feels like they would want to respond. And it's two-part. First, how receptive are mothers in receiving care? So I think some of us talked about the experiences of working with women, and so how receptive are mothers in receiving care? And then also a second part to this question is, I know some cultures do not want to discuss recent violence they may experience. Would anyone like to jump in on this question and share their experiences?
Katie, I could come in. This is Corazon from Nairobi, Kenya. So the first question is, are mothers receptive in receiving care? Yes, I would say that the majority of our clients are actually mothers, and they're very receptive to care. And when they come to us, they sometimes come in crisis, they sometimes come tired, and they just need someone to listen to them. They need to feel like someone is concerned about them and is willing to support them. Because the urban context of Nairobi, Kenya is very challenging. And as I mentioned in my speech, most men have abandoned all the assistance to the women. It's the women who take care of the economic needs. They take care of their families. So many of the women present with high levels of stress and depression. So yes, they're very receptive to care. And do they openly discuss violence? Not necessarily. Many of the cases we get, they will report violence when you're doing individual counseling. But when you ask them to report, it's very challenging for them because they're still bound by cultural beliefs that demand you're not supposed to report the man, or the man is rightfully, he has a right to harm you in that way. So they do not really talk about violence, but when they've reached the end, they talk about it, but they're not willing to go a step forward. They are reluctant to go to the safe houses. They're reluctant to report to the police. So that's a challenge in our programming, as we noticed. Over to you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think in general, that's why we have these holistic supports that Jane was touching on earlier, that communities can learn from each other, these peer-based models. I would say in a lot of our programming, we don't expect people to sit one-on-one and share about the past violent experiences. We just create a space that if they do feel like they need to talk, then they have access to that space. But a lot of our work is building up that community around them so that they can just cope with what's really stressing them right now. And that's, I think, what Jane was also speaking to. I think that sums it up for the questions that we have for today. And I think we are just 1 minute over. So I'm going to pass it over to MK to close out.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you all. I just want to take a moment and just thank my extraordinary colleagues from around the world that work with JRS and do this work day in and day out. Margaret, I hope your question was answered in tandem with some of these other questions with regarding women telling their stories, but I would love to follow up with you later. Just one note, I just want to say thanks not only to my colleagues, but to all of you. You heard many stories and many examples of the donors reporting back to donors about numbers. And I have to say, everyone on this call, and US donors in particular, have really embraced the mission of accompaniment and understand the importance of 10 women and the importance of 10,000 or 1,000 people when we're trying to provide services for MHPSS. And it's because of all of you that they are able to do these services day in and day out. Is because of your financial support. So I just wanted to thank everyone. If you do have follow-up questions, please reach out to myself or Kevin, and we will get in touch with our MHPSS colleagues or Katie and to answer a more thorough answer for you about our programs. But again, I want to thank you all for your continued financial support, moral support, and also prayerful support to our programs for these extraordinary women and girls. Thank you.